Welcome friends. Today's our topic of discussion is Introduction to the Empire Writes Back by Bill Ashcroft, Gareth Griffiths and Helen Tiffin. Actually, the Empire Writes Back is a text, a seminal text of post-colonial literary theory that has been written by three post-colonial uh, critics, Bill Ashcroft, Gareth Griffin and Helen Tiffin. And in this seminal book, they talk about what is the need of post-colonial theory and what is the need of post-colonial literatures and what is the need of bringing both of post-colonial literary theory and post-colonial literatures uh, at the center of the discussion in post-colonial nations and societies across the world. When we read an introduction that has been written to this book, The Empire Writes Back, it stands out to be one of the seminal texts that makes the post-colonial readers understand what is post-colonial theory, what is post-colonial uh, literature, or what are post-colonial literatures. It talks at the length about certain you can say notions, certain can say concepts which are closely associated with post-colonial uh, theory and literature. In in this introduction, these three of the critics talk at a length about what are post-colonial literatures. Post-colonial literatures and English studies means what is the uh, correlationship between post-colonial literatures and English studies. That relation has been somewhere highlighted, defined, and explained over there in this introduction. The introduction also highlights the development of post-colonial literature, particularly it highlights the stages of its development. It also talks about a hegemony. It also talks about a language that post-colonial literature should have. It also highlights place and displacement. At the same time, it also talks about post-coloniality and post-colonial theory at a length. When we read this introduction, we find that it has been written with a certain objectives, uh, and those objectives are that the after reading an introduction attached to this book called as The Empire Writes Back, the post-colonial readers would be able to can say form a sufficient can say uh, foundation to look at uh, post-colonial literature and post-colonial theory from certain standpoints. When we read this introduction, we come to know that it opens with the discussion of the global impact of colonialism. This introduction highlights that what was the scale of influence of colonialism. It states that more than three-quarters of the world's population today has had their lives shaped by the experiences of colonialism. It means that more than three-quarters of the world, means 75% of the world, was once colony of post-colonial powers, European colonial powers. That has been highlighted over there. And this introduction also brings to our notice that the impact of colonialism were not just political and economic. They were beyond the political economic impacts, and which were the impacts which influence the perpetual framework of contemporary people or contemporary society. Contemporary society from post-colonial nations. The very perpetual framework of the contemporary society of post-colonial nations have been influenced by colonialism. Though colonialism has come to an end today, still this perpetual framework, influenced by colonialism, colonial culture, colonial power, is evident today in most of the post-colonial nations, in most of the post-colonial societies and cultures. It also highlights that as and how arts and literatures were being employed by the colonizers as the powerful tools for encoding and expressing the day-to-day realities of the colonized people. And this is how the can say literature and arts were being used for encoding and expressing over there by the colonial power in the colonized societies. This introduction also highlights that as and how these art, literature and fine arts were being used as the weapons to control post-colonial societies. Besides this, this introduction tries to define post-colonial literatures. And before defining what are the post-colonial literatures, it defines the term post-colonial. And here in this introduction, three of the critics, those who have written this book, Bill Ashcroft, Gareth Griffiths, and Helen Tiffin, bring to our notice that there is a kind of a controversy over the issue that what is the meaning of the term post-colonial and what and as and how it has to be written, with hyphen or without hyphen. Some of the critics believe that when the term post-colonial is being written post hyphen colonial, it means it gives reference to the period of the post-colonial nations after their liberation from or their independence from the respective colonial powers under whose control they were. And the term without hyphen, these critics believe that refers to the continuity of the experiences that post-colonial society has gone through. Some of the critics believe that whenever this term is written without hyphen, means the term post-colonial without hyphen, it refers to the particular period of history. That means the first moment of the encounter of the colonized with the colonial power is something that is the beginning of post-colonial, and that continues from that point, and can say it can say somewhere runs down to the history even till the date. And this is how they believe that whenever the term post-colonial is being written without hyphen, it refers to that continuity, that historical continuity, means from the moment of colonial encounter of the colonized till the present, and it has no end at all. This is how they believe, means, and beyond that they also make it clear to us that whenever we use this term in a historic sense, it is not merely period after independence. They believe, most of the critics believe that It is the period even before the so-called independence, from the point where the colonized encountered with the colonial power. And they believe that this term post-colonial refers to a continuity of preoccupation initiated by European imperial aggressions. This introduction also tries to define that which geographical region has to be called as post-colonial region or post-colonial nations, and it enlists some of the countries across the uh, globe, nations across the globe, and this geographical reach of uh, post-colonial includes African countries, Australia, Bangladesh, Canada, Caribbean countries, India, Malaysia, Malta, New Zealand, Pakistan, Singapore, South Pacific Islands countries, and Sri Lanka. This is what these can say critics believe, that these countries should be called as post-colonial nations, and the literatures written from these nations have to be called as post-colonial literatures. Beyond that, they also classify literature written in USA as post-colonial literature. They state the special case of USA. They bring to the notice of the readers that though USA is a global power today, USA can also be classified as post-colonial, though its current position of power often masks the status, but once it was a European colony, and that is why even USA has to be counted as a post-colonial or post-colonial nation, post-colonial society, post-colonial culture, whatever the context may be. And the literature written in USA has to be counted as post-colonial literature. It means American literature has to be counted as post-colonial literature. This is what has been highlighted into this introduction. This introduction uh, talks about some common features of post-colonial writing. Particularly, it brings to our notice that these literatures, means post-colonial literatures, emerged by foregrounding tension with the imperial power. Post-colonial writing came into its own by foregrounding the tension with the imperial power, and beyond that, they bring to our notice that what is the one of the most common feature of post-colonial writing is that it asserts its difference from the metropolitan center. I mean, the post-colonial writing somewhere asserts its difference and it independent, can say, existence from the post-colonial metropolitan center. It can say somewhere uh, looks at itself as an independent can say literature. Post-colonial writing or post-colonial literature does not seem to count itself as one of the branches of uh, metropolitan literature, means literature written in the motherland of colonial power. In case of English literature, if we can say talk at a length, then literatures written in Africa or African countries, India, then Caribbean countries, South Pacific islands. These are, can say, the literatures which have been written in English language, but they have their separate existence. They do not, can say, count themselves to be part of or to be the offshoots or of or branches of British literature. This is what is the common, can say, feature of post-colonial literatures that has been highlighted over here in this introduction to The Empire Writes Back. even it has been highlighted, or it has been somewhere explained over here in this introduction, that even with the regional differences, post-colonial literatures share a relationship with the center that has evolved over the centuries. Though the post-colonial literature share a kind of difference with the metropolitan center, still it has a certain kind of a relationship, and that has evolved over the course of the time. This introduction also assesses that as and how English studies and the growth of empire helped each other in order to grow. It also brings to our notice that English studies were a political discipline. English studies introduced in British colonies or English colonies were not a political, project. It was definitely political project. It brings to our notice that the study of English has always been a political practice used to serve nationalism by the colonial powers. It also brings to our notice that as and how colonial power very cautiously replaced the classics in 19th century, and it, can say, developed an academic subject to replace the classics with the British, or say English writings. It also highlights that how English study had been used by colonial power in order to control over the vast population and vast, can say, region of the colonies. For example, in India, British administrators used English literature as a tool to maintain control over the population under the guise of liberal education. Liberal education was just a mask that had been used in order to control the uh, vast population and vast, can say, region of the colonies like India. It also brings to our notice that English studies created a privileging norm cautiously. Privileging norm that denied the value of the peripheral or marginal. It means that whatever that is being written in colonies were being denied the value, were being, can say, termed as if they were not having with any kind of a value. The introduction also talks about the struggle for decolonization in academia. It brings to our notice that as and how in post-colonial nations, certain activists, certain critics, certain educationalists are struggling for decolonizing the academia. Though in 20th century, particularly at the beginning of the second half of 20th century, most of the colonies got independence. Their, can say, land got decolonized, but their society, their culture, their languages could not get decolonized. And here the, can say, need for the decolonization of academia that has been traced over there. At the same time, what kind of the struggle that has been going on for the decolonization in academia, that has been discussed at the length in this introduction. And this is the most important, can say, part of this introduction, that it makes us acquainted with the struggle for decolonization in academia. It brings to our notice that many, can say, writers from periphery attempted to be more English than English. And somewhere it shows that how the can say colonization or the science of colonization, or we may call as the reminiscence of colonization, have still remained into post-colonial can say societies, in post-colonial cultures. The introduction highlights that the non-English tried to become more English than the can say proper English people. And the examples of Henry James and T.S. Eliot have been quoted over there, as and how they tried to imitate English culture, English literature, the English cultural social beliefs into their writings, and how they try to be more English than the English. And it also can say makes us acquainted with that, as and how this link of can say cultural incorporation can be broken. And the solution over this kind of a cultural incorporation, or such a cultural can say in slavery, that have been can say stated over here or suggested over here in this introduction. It has been can say brought to the notice that this can say link of can say cultural slavery can be can say can be broken only when the political societies will establish their difference from post-colonial societies, will can say establish their difference from the colonial can say metropolitan center. And it also brings to our notice that some of the key thinkers of post-colonial theory have somewhere attempted to break this kind of a link that can say created a kind of a cultural can say hegemony of Europe over the uh, colonies and post-colonial nations. That is to can say somewhere abolition of English departments from the academia of post-colonial nations. The writers like Gugiwa Thiong'o somewhere suggested that the English departments uh, in the universities from post-colonial nations have to be abolished, and separate school of linguistics and literatures have to be brought in their place. It doesn't mean that Gugiwa Thiong'o suggested that the universities from post-colonial nations should not teach English language or English literature. The only change that he suggested that the syllabi that would be can say that would be formed over there should have post-colonial literatures at their centers, and British literature at a periphery. He is not of the opinion that that English literature should not be taught. He just brings to the notice of the can say post-colonial nations and society that their literature, post-colonial literature, uh, that is written in English language, has to form the major can say core part of the uh, courses which are being can say formed for graduation in English, post graduation in English. He also brings to the notice that whenever this kind of a change that he and some of the post-colonial can say thinkers and activists attempted, the kind of a resistance that can say strongly came over there, particularly from the places like West Indies and India, wherein the nexus of power between literature and British culture has strongly been resisted this kind of a dismantling. He brings to our notice that even in India there was a kind of a strong resistance found whenever such a kind of a proposition was being, can say, placed before the entire post-colonial society by uh, critics like Gugiwa Thiong'o himself and John Decker and the others. He brings to our notice that why this kind of a resistance to dismantling of English literature departments or English language departments and their conversion into separate schools of linguistics and literature comes over there, just because still the human minds from post-colonial societies have not got decolonized. He states some of the important, can say, development uh, into post-colonial literature, particularly this introduction highlights the important stages of development of post-colonial literatures. It brings to our notice that post-colonial literatures have developed in three stages. The first period or the first stage of the development was in imperial period, and he brings to our notice that post-colonial literature in imperial period was being produced by a literate elite identifying with a colonizing power, that is settler, travelers or administrators. It means that the companions of, can say, companions of colonialism, or the, can say, persons, those who were part of colonial setup like settlers, travelers or some of the colonial administrators, they wrote post-colonial literature in the sense that they wrote about a new, can say, culture that they came into contact with as a colonial administrators, and this is how the post-colonial literature uh, began over there, or the post-colonial literature came into its own, and this is the first stage of development of uh, post-colonial literatures, wherein post-colonial literatures were being written uh, by the colonizers themselves. The second stage of development of post-colonial literatures is imperial license. It means in this period post-colonial literatures were being written by the natives, means post-colonial literatures were being written by the colonized subject, and particularly natives or outcasts, those who entered the privileged class of uh, colonial setup created by colonial setup using the dominant language. It means that there was a class in the colonial period of some of the natives, those who were able to speak and read and write the language of colonizer or colonial power, deliberately under the guise of liberal education taught some of the colonized uh, people their language in order to create a babu class, or say the class of a secondary officers, so that they would be able to run their administration smoothly. And from, can say, this kind of a, attempt that they did, a particular class came into its own, and that was being named as privileged class just because they knew they could speak language of the colonizers. They were being given certain positions into colonial administration, and in this second period of, or the second stage of development of post-colonial literatures, post-colonial literatures were being written by these natives, those who were part of colonial administration, and they were writing under the guise they were writing, you can say, not against the colonial, you can say, oppression, colonial atrocities, colonial suppression. They were just, you can say, writing about colonial societies, but they were not openly exposing the ugly, you can say, face of colonial power. And the third and last stage of development of post-colonial literatures is modern post-colonial. In the modern post-colonial stage, we find that the abrogation of an imperial power that has been, you can say, over there, appropriation of language for new and distinctive usages. And in this period, we find that the post-colonial writers started to write openly against colonial atrocities, colonial exploitation, colonial uh, uh, dominance, colonial hegemony, and they somewhere tried to write in a nationalistic veins in order to, can say, expose the ugly face of colonialism to the common people of the society, so that they would come together and they would be able to form a unity in order to overthrow the colonial power. And this is the most important phase of post-colonial literature that, can say, has been referred to over here in this introduction. uh, the introduction also highlights that as and how there is a kind of a, can say, control that had been, can say, gained by uh, colonial power or colonizer over the language by creating a standard metropolitan version of their own language in order to, can say, demean some of the varieties those who which, can say, got evolved in the course of the time in the uh, colonies. So in order to keep them subverted, they created a kind of a variety of English language that is received standard English in order to somewhere underestimate the varieties which got evolved into the colonies. For example, Canadian English, Indian English, Kenyan English, African English. This is how they did uh, certain things, can say, over there. This introduction also talks about place and displacement. It also brings to our notice that a major feature of post-colonial literatures is concern with the developing an effective relationship between self and place. This is the major, can say, feature of English literature that has been highlight not English literature, post-colonial literatures written in English language, that has been highlighted over here in this introduction. That post-colonial literature is the concern with developing an effective relationship between self and place. It, can say, highlights which were the causes of displacement. It enumerates certain causes of displacement. uh, there were certain causes of physical displacement, including migration, enslavement, transportation, or indentured labor. It also highlights the causes of cultural displacement, like destruction of indigenous personalities by superior cultural model. And it also highlights what is the need of post-colonial theory. And the first reason that this introduction states that why post-colonial theory should be over there, why the independent post-colonial theory should be over there, it brings to the notice of the readers from post-colonial world that European theory has failed to handle the post-colonial complexities. It could not handle the complexities which can say are being found in post-colonial nations, and it is not adequate to encompass the varied experiences of post-colonial society, nation, and its culture. It also brings to our notice that one of the need for post-colonial theory is that the center tried to can say push the post-colonial literatures at the margin, but the reaction came over there, and these can say these can say marginal literatures became very much can say powerful, and they became can say a pace where experiences could be seen as pluralistic and uncentered. And this is how we find that post-colonial literatures became pluralistic. They had the pluralistic voices, and that is why the European theory was not able to assess these literatures in a uh, sufficient adequate manner. One of the important can say reason that has been given over there as to why there is a need for post-colonial theory is that uh, these writers, these critics, I mean, Bill Ashcroft and Gareth Griffin and Helen Tiffin, bring to the notice that the post-colonial nations and post-colonial literatures have become an unprecedented source of creative energy and sight for decentering traditional thought. And this is how, in order to assess this creative energy, they think that the European theory that is inadequate to assess these pluralistic experiences. They feel that there is a need for the post-colonial theory that would be able to encompass and assess these can say pluralistic experiences which are being found over there in post-colonial nations. Thank you, friends. Thanks for watching.